Alright, the movie starts off with us already getting explanations right from the get go. First thing they talk about us is the actual legend of the Ten Rings. We hear a female telling the story of the Ten Rings and how a warlord kind of happenstancely fell upon them. It turns out that the rings give you superhuman strength, a bunch of crazy abilities, but the big thing that I didn't know about is that they give you immortality. So she even explains that, with all this power, it could have been used for good, but this guy didn't. He decided to go on conquest. He tore apart armies. Like, the first scene it shows him is him rushing an entire army by himself. He has an army at his back, but they don't fight until he starts just decimating them. And they're shooting arrows at him. He's literally the rings. The way they did the rings was actually really, really interesting. The rings could shoot off his arms like projectiles. He could fight hand to hand with them, increasing the power of all his strikes. He could. It looked like electrical energy going through the rings, but he could swing them around like whips, and they'd be connected by a string of energy. And the way they did the rings was just so cool. Like, when he wasn't in a fight, the rings would rest literally at his wrists. Whenever he would go into a fight, they'd go up his arm and like tighten around his arm, almost looking like they were gonna expand an armor or something, and they would glow blue. So we follow this guy through the years, and we find out that the entire time he's been amassing his army. That the name the Ten Rings, you guys remember the Iron Man movie? They actually talk about that. The Ten Rings in Iron Man were basically a ripoff of the actual Ten Rings. These guys are basically the League of Shadows of Marvel, where they became assassins that were basically shaping history. And this guy's been behind the scenes the entire time. We go up to 1996, and we find out that while this guy has so much money, so much wealth, so much power, he still wants more. And what happens is he ends up finding out about a village where the village technically exists in another dimension. But the village is said to house not only people but mythical creatures, and that they live together. But that these people practice a martial art that is given to them by the gods. So he wants this, he wants more power, so he goes to checking out this village. He finds the forest that leads into the village, and the village is protected by a moving forest. It's supposed to be like a giant maze that's constantly shifting and basically attacking anybody that enters into it. Like, they're driving through, and the pathway behind them starts to close off, and then the front starts to close off until it destroys the vehicle. He only manages to survive because of the rings. He ends up traveling through the forest on foot, and he actually finds a woman who tells him to leave, that he's not welcome in the village, and that his journey basically needs to end. He ends up trying to fight her. Obviously, he thinks he has the advantage because he has the rings, but she not only is a ridiculously skilled martial artist, she actually has some powers of her own where she is controlling the earth, controlling the water, controlling the air, along with her fighting style. She actually, at one point, is able to take the rings from him and use them against him. And it was very interesting, but as they're fighting, you see them locking eyes. You see them at some points where it looks like they're almost dancing. After the last attack that she does, where she catches the rings from him, they actually change color, and then she hits him with them. He actually gets blasted into a puddle, and she disappears. We hear her still talking, and it turns out that this is actually the father of the main character. And this is basically the story of how Shang-Chi was born. This man and this woman, they end up falling in love. She ends up leaving the village to go and be with him, and they basically have a family. And this is her telling almost like a bedtime story to her son. after she's done telling them the story of the Ten Rings, she also tells them a story about their village, where it turns out that not only does their village revolve around these mythical creatures, that there's a guardian in the village that their martial art basically channels the power of this guardian. That's what she had the supernatural powers for. And the symbol of this guardian is a dragon. She actually makes an origami dragon and talks to him about this guardian. The last thing that happens in this scene, she gives him what looks like an emerald-colored necklace, and tells him if he ever feels lost, that the necklace will be, the way to find his way home. We jump to the present. We see Shang-Chi basically waking up. He gets up off of his alarm, works out a little bit, goes to his job. He is a valet. It's funny because it shows somebody roll up into a really sexy car. The music's going, kind of hip hoppy, and someone gets out the car, and it just shows him, catch the dude with the keys. At this point, we meet Shang-Chi's best friend, Katie. They have been friends for a very long time. They're extremely close, and no, they're not lovers. They made a very clear point that these are just friends. They work together, and she wants to go take this dude's car out for a spin because it's a sexy ass car. We see that Shang-Chi changed his name to Sean, and he's kind of, got a good moral compass trying to get her to stop because she's acting crazy. But she ends up talking him in, and they take off. Now, Katie is a fantastic character. She is literally the heart and soul of this entire movie. This is the character I was talking about in the spoiler-free version part of the review, where she is just a normal girl, and she gets pulled in because she's friends with Sean, and a lot of the explanation is people explain to her, what's going on. We see a little glimpse into their lives. After, they're done with their workday, they go out with some friends. We find out, basically, how they met each other. They knew each other in high school. Turned out that somebody tried to bully Sean, and she, defended him. It turned into a big thing. It was a cool little explanation to basically show just how close they were. But across from them, they have another friend from high school with her husband, and she kind of gets on their case a little bit because they kind of live in very carefree, drinking when they want, partying when they want, and they work as valets. But she explains to them that they're two of the most talented people that she knows, and they're not doing anything with it. Whereas she, went from being kind of a crazy person with them. I remember the story. The dude tried to bully Sean. Katie defended him and then swept the dude's keys, and the three of them went and drove right in his car. But this third friend, whose name, it really didn't matter. She only had 2 scenes in the entire movie. But she basically tells them that they should do more with their lives. Now, again, Katie, Sean are going home talking. They're actually complaining about what she said. And they decide, we got a little cool, funny scene with them where they're about to go home because they have to work the morning shift. And they're like, unless, and the next scene cuts to them drunk as hell singing karaoke. And it was an absolute wonderful scene because it shows, again, the strength of their friendship. They end up passing out in the karaoke room. And it was just really, really funny. Now, this is where shit starts to get crazy. Because we fast forward to the next morning, because they have to work the morning shift, and we see Sean walking to her house. We meet her and her whole family. And the whole family knows Sean very, very well. They make jokes about him eating their food. They make jokes about them always spending time together. Even her grandmother asks when they're going to get married. It was a really, really wholesome scene. But now we go on to the bus where Sean and Katie are on the way to work. They see another woman, typing a paper out on the bus. And Katie's like, I don't want to be that. I want to be able to, relax and enjoy my life. And as they're talking, a man in a black suit walks up to Sean and starts talking to him in Chinese, and basically tells him that he wants his necklace. And he's like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, Sean talks to him in English, and he's like, then give me the necklace. and the dude tries to take the necklace off of Sean's neck. This was the necklace that his mother gave him in case he ever needs to find home. And even Kay's like, do you see this guy? Does he look like he knows how to fight? Like, why are you messing with him? And it's not, it turns out there's 3 of them there. They pick Sean up and they're messing with him. And it's not until one of them actually, like, grabs Katie by the face and pushes her that Sean just, like, snaps. He hits the dude mad hard, sends him almost flying. And this is the first time we get to see, how good the choreography is. The fight scene on this bus was crazy. Like, I can't even actually describe it. There were flips, there were crazy punches, kicks. He was swinging around bars on the bus. Like, he was beating ass. And we get some hilariousness as a dude pulls out his phone and does a whole ass YouTube intro and then starts recording the fight, talking smack in the background the whole time. It was hysterical. The crowd went nuts. And then as he's beating he beats these 3 dudes, a 4th dude shows up. Big dude. And then he takes off his jacket and the dude's got a stub. Like, his arm is just missing with a chunk of metal attached to it. And this dude is literally like at least twice the size of Shang-Chi. And then out of that arm, a fucking sword comes out. I guess this guy's name was Razor Fist. And again, their fight is insane because he is huge, so he's able to tank hits from Shang-Chi, where he's swinging, with this giant sword that it looks like the outside of it's heated because it's like glowing orange, and he's cutting through the side of the bus, the poles, everything, and Shang-Chi's trying to protect the people as they're fighting. Unfortunately, the bus driver gets taken out, and all the people are trying to move away from this crazy ass fight, so they're in the back of the bus. Katie, being a badass, takes over the bus because Sean's trying to fight and drive the bus, and he's failing miserably. But Katie takes over driving the bus. This dude, as he's cutting through the bus, cuts the brake line. So like, oh shit. And then the way the bus was in this movie is it was like 2 buses attached together with like a soft part in the middle, so that way they could turn. So as he's cutting through that, the bus almost gets split in half because this dude is just swinging wildly. Shang-Chi manages to get the people into the front of the bus because the bus is literally about to split in half. Kick the guy into the other half and tells Katie to turn hard and forcibly rips the bus the rest of the way. They manage to stop by wedging themselves on a trash truck and running over a bunch of cars. But hey, there was no brakes. After the whole fight, all the people are safe. Sean realizes that the guy got his necklace, and that's why he's not coming after them. We see the guy come out of the other half of the bus. He's fine, puts his sword away, has the necklace, leaves. Sean starts freaking out. He goes back to his house. I did miss a little part, but he had a postcard with the dragon symbol. It was basically the origami dragon, but drawn on a postcard with an address on the back of it. Turns out that he has a sister named Xiaoling. I hope I said that right. And he thought the postcard was from her, and he thought the postcard was basically leading her to her address. So he knows that their father is the one who sent the assassins. He knows those are the members of the 10 Rings, and that he thinks they're going to go after his sister next. And if he even says if they hurt her, he's going to lose it. So he goes to take a plane to go find his sister. Katie's spazzing out. She's like, "Who are you? I've known you forever. I never knew you could do that. Tell me what's going on." And at first, he tries to get her to stop. He tells her, "I have a sister. I have to go help her." And again, you see her loyalty to him because she's like, "Fine, you can explain to me on the goddamn plane." So the next scene, we get some more explanation. We talk about Shang-Chi's training, that after their mother died, which they are very vague about their mother dying almost the entire movie until they explain how she actually dies. But after his mother dying, his father started him on his training and basically trained him to be unstoppable. train him to be a perfect killing machine. We see the entirety of his training from childhood, from him being a child up to him being a teenager, where he finishes his training, and it was brutal. Like he had bloody knuckles. He would get beat with sticks. He would get cut up by weapons. Like it was crazy. But once the training's finally done, his father sent him on a mission to go kill a man, to train to be an assassin. And apparently Sean said he couldn't go through with it. So he ran away. He knew he couldn't go back to his father's. And that's where he was for the last 10 years. We get some funny scenes with, Katie and Sean and the stewardess. Again, they made these characters very, very likable. Next scene, they're in the city that his sister's supposed to be in. They're at the address. They're going up an elevator with a pretty sketchy looking dude. He explains that, he's looking for his sister. The dude has him sign the contract. He says, you can get into the building. After they sign the contract, they're walking through. And he is actually basically a YouTube star. It's got, he said 3 million views in a day. And just the clip of him beating these guys' asses all over YouTube. And a host kind of pulls them in, treats them like they're celebrities. He's like, "Oh my God, you were the guy, the bus guy, you were the driver." As they're walking through, they're basically in an underground fighting club in the top of a skyscraper. So underground's kind of, and we actually see that they have metas fighting, not just normal people. And this was a very interesting scene because as he's trying to talk about his sister, this guy's like, "Bro, you signed a contract, you gotta fight. You're online famous, you need to." Now, this is where we get our first crazy-ass cameo. So this is the part where we see Abomination fighting. This guy's telling him, we see all the fights, they're walking by, these are small fights, these are, no big deal. They're going to be fighting up there on the main stage. And the main stage is literally this, it's made of glass, and it looks mad cool. And we see Abomination fighting somebody. The thing that I didn't realize is who the fuck he was fighting. It was our boy Wong. And Wong is fighting Abomination. Mind you, they changed up Abomination's look. He does still look similar to the way he did in The Incredible Hulk, except he's more green and he actually has, the crazy ass fish ears that Abomination used to have. So they reworked him a little bit to look closer to his comic book counterpart. As they're fighting, he kind of hits Wong a little too hard, and Wong spazzes on him. He's like, "Hey, that hurt." It's like, "You want me to show you?" And Abomination goes to throw a punch, and he uses the rings from the Doctor Strange movie to open a small portal. His fist goes through the portal, comes back and hits him in the face, knocks him the fuck out. It's like this. That's how it feels. So we jump to the locker room and we see Wong, trying to take care of Abomination. He's like, "Bro, I told you to pull those punches. Now you know how it feels." And we actually see him take him back to what looks like his prison cell. I guess he got a little bit of time out. And Wong leaves, the fight promoter's like, "I love that guy." But he has Sean take off his shirt. He has Sean go into the arena. And we see Sean's opponent is a female. Turns out it's a sister. And she beats the dog shit out of him. Turns out that the entire time Sean was training, their father wouldn't let her train, but she was in the background training. She basically watched everything that Sean went through and mimicked it to kind of train herself into being able to fight and defend herself. After they fight, he ends up beating her. They fight. She ends up beating him with this insane kick to the face. Oh my God, it was great. The fight choreography of this scene was dope. It really showed, the difference in their styles. But she ended up winning because he refused to actually hit his sister. So next scene, we see him icing his face. Katie won mad money, and he's like, "Did you bet against me?" So it was really funny. But we actually get to formally meet his sister. She explains that she built this fight club from the ground up. That she, they had issues. He basically abandoned her after he couldn't go through with the job. He left, never came back. She eventually, grew up on her own and left. Katie ends up respecting his sister a lot as she starts telling her story. How her father wouldn't let her train with the boys, so she trained herself. She built her own business on her own. She was a serious badass. And while they're talking, he tries to warn her. Dad's coming for you. They got my necklace. He's gonna want yours. And she's like, I can take care of myself. But then right at that moment, the Ten Rings basically come in. She takes a hidden elevator out, but leaves Sean and Katie to fend for themselves. So they're like, oh my god, what are we gonna do? They bust open a window, and there's outside the building is bamboo scaffolding. They're trying to get into an elevator that's on the side. So he ends up talking Katie onto the scaffolding. As they're on the scaffolding, they get attacked by basically a bunch of ninjas. And we get another seriously cool fight scene. Because the entire time they're fighting on the scaffolding, it's up, down, it's left, right. Like it was a lot to keep track of. And they're on the side of a building. We actually get to see something cool about the Ten Rings is they have very, very advanced weaponry. A lot of them favor using hook swords, kind of like Movado and Cabal from Mortal Kombat, except they also double as tasers. So even with Sean fighting them, blocking some of the attacks, he still was getting electrocuted. Katie's trying to get away, and these men attack Katie like she's another fighter. But they end up kicking her off the side of the building. She grabs a piece of the bamboo, and they cut it up. They cut the strings, the cloth holding it together, and it starts to fall over. So Sean is trying to fight them, trying to get to her. Right when he's about to get to her, the bamboo snaps and she falls, and really seriously believed she was gonna die. But we see that his sister didn't actually leave them. She saves Katie, and then joins the fight, and the two of them are going nuts. The way they did this scene was, I think they leaned a little too heavy on the CGI, because there were a lot of points in this scene where the CGI just really stood out. This is where the first time I really noticed the issues with it was the bus scene. There were a couple times where it just was just eh. But then this scene too, those two scenes were our first two major action scenes, and the CGI really was just kind of meh. But talk about the flashback real quick. We saw the man that was mainly training him to kill. He was a dude wearing a mask, and there was actually a point where he cuts Sean, but this dude ends up showing up while he's fighting, and basically takes his sister's necklace and dips. Sean goes after him, and Sean ends up fighting this dude one-on-one. This man basically trained him. The dude pulls out two knives. Now, this scene was also very cool. This guy's fighting style was super aggressive. He was going for the kill. At first, he ends up almost beating Sean, but then Sean comes back, manages to take one of his weapons. They're going back and forth. He manages to get on top of the guy, and after a second of hesitation, it plays through the memories of him training him, and it shows him basically beating the fuck out of Sean as a kid. Sean finally goes to kill him, just to get blasted off the dude by the rings. It turns out his dad was there. And his dad, at first, goes up to his son. He's just like, you know what? I told my men they would never be able to kill you, and I'm glad I was right. He's like, I told them they stood no chance against you. And he actually grabs his son, puts them forehead to forehead, and he's like, I missed you, and it's time to come home. So as he's talking to him, his army kind of brings in Katie and his sister, and he takes all of them back to his compound, which is the actual Ten Rings compound. We see flashes of this, when he talks about his mom, when he talked about his training. And after bringing them all together, we kind of see the environment they lived in, where a lot of his father's attention is on him, not so much on his sister. He tells him, it's time for you to come by my side, and he's like, take the women to their room. We see his sister's room, she's got posters all over the place. And we go over to Sean and his dad, and he's trying to understand what his dad wants. He's like, don't hurt them. So, as they're talking, Sean's giving his dad some shit, and he wants to find out the motivation of why he brought them together. And he doesn't. He basically kind of brushes them off. We see Sean, he goes up to a pole that he used to punch as training to, condition his hands, and it shows him as a kid, bloody knuckles, and it shows his father, taking care of him. He shows that he cared about him, cleaning up his knuckles, telling him to stop when he needs to stop. We end up going to the next scene, which is them at dinner. It's Sean, Katie, his sister, his father, and he ends up talking directly to Katie and asks her what her Chinese name is. Mind you, she was born in America, so she kind of makes one up. We actually get to find out his name. It's Wenwu, and Wenwu explains how important names are, and we get a funny explanation where they talk about Iron Man 3. The actor that played the Mandarin, that he was supposed to be portraying him. And the man, he says, I've been called many names before, but because of this man, this pretending to be a terrorist, pretending to be me, it made people afraid of a fruit. It was a very interesting scene showing just how much pride he has in who he is. And then the next scene is then he finally explaining his motivation. That basically, once his brother and sister ran away, that his father went back into his research about his mother's village, called Talo, yeah. And while he was in there researching, he heard his wife's voice. He thought he was going crazy, but the voice kept speaking to him, basically saying that inside his mother's village is a gateway. He's very vague about the gateway, because I'm guessing he doesn't have a whole lot of information about it, but that his wife is behind this gate. That if he can break the gateway, they can be together again. And the 10 rings have the power to open this gateway. So he needs to find a way into the village. His daughter think he's crazy, think there's no way this is possible, and then he holds up the necklaces and what do you think these are? Because he explains that his wife had been leaving clues for him to go and do this. We see what the necklaces are actually for. They were in the oval shapes, and he puts them into the statue of a dragon, and they become the dragon's eyes, and they light up and glow orange. And when this happens, we get this really, really cool scene where water appears on the statue and on a mural behind it, and it explodes, covering the entire area. And Sean, Katie, they're bugging out because this water is like floating in midair. The water hits the ground and then rises up in the shape of the forest. And a light lights up as we get the explanation from Wenwu that once every year, since the forest is constantly changing pathways, there's no way to know which way it's going to go. But once every year, a pathway actually opens through the forest. And as long as you know when and where the pathway is, it'll actually lead you straight into the village. And the light shows where the pathway opens up, and it's literally just straight one turn, and bam, you're in the village. So he knows exactly what's going to happen. He's like, I got 3 days, and now I know what the pathway is. And Sean tries to stop him. He obviously gets beat, and then Sean, his sister, Katie, they all get thrown in the dungeon. Katie's kind of just blown away by everything that's going on. She expresses how his father's terrifying, the magic water. She's like, I don't even know what's real anymore. And then they hear this like crazy sound. It sounds like somebody like moaning or dying. And Sean and his sister go to go check it out. And Katie's just like, you're really gonna go toward that noise? And this is where we get another very, very funny cameo. Well, I guess it's not really a cameo because he sticks around for the rest of the movie. But they open the door and they see the actor from Iron Man 3. Trevor Slattery, I think I said that right. They see the actor that played the Mandarin role that he played the bad guy in Iron Man, but he was just an actor. Well, turns out that he ends up explaining that Wenwu didn't like that, so Wenwu was going to execute him. But he put on a show. He ended up acting really funny and made the entire Ten Rings laugh. So they kept him on basically as entertainment. So that's the whole reason he's there, but he's in prison cell. And out of nowhere, from behind like a pillar, we see an animal come out. This animal had no face. It was literally like a giant fuzzball with short arms and legs and wings. And Sean and his sister kind of freak out. They're like, "What the hell is that?" And Trevor is just like, "Oh my god, you can see him." I thought I was going crazy because obviously it's a mythical creature. And this little animal is like talking, is grunting and like, and Trevor understands what it's saying. But he basically explains that he knows Sean's mother, grew up with his mother, and just wants to go back home to the village. This thing came from the village with Sean's mother. This thing also says that it can lead them into the village without having to wait 3 days for the opening. Because they know if they wait, their father's going to attack the village. Their father even said, either they're going to let me open this gateway and get my wife back, or I'm going to burn this village to the ground. So they want to stop them. They want to preserve their mother's village because this is just wrong. While Katie and Sean are talking to this dude, his sister kind of disappears. She manages to find a tunnel system that was under the compound. That's how she escaped in the first place. And she busts down a wall and she finds them a way out of the prison. They end up into the garage. They steal a car. After a little short chase scene, and some fighting inside the vehicle as they're being chased. Like the dudes on motorcycles come up inside of them, and we get to see basically what kind of badasses Sean and his sister are together. They end up using a dude's biometrics to get through out of the compound, and they end up heading to the forest. They get to the forest. Wendel's just like, "It's fine. Let's just prepare to leave in 3 days." They get to the forest. The animal is sitting in the front with Trevor, and he basically tells Katie where to go because Katie's driving. They start driving into the forest. He's like, "You want to speed up? Speed up." And this dude's like goofy. Like the entire time he's acting like he's on another planet. He explains that the reason he started acting was because he thought Planet of the Apes. He thought the apes were real, and that he thought that they were acting. It was wild. He was a trip. But anyway, as they're going through the forest starts closing around them. There's a small pocket that's open and it's shifting. And he basically said, "You gotta stay in this pocket." And he tells her, "Speed up, go left, go right, blah, blah." They end up just barely making it to the entrance to the village. Barely. But once they make it in, they start driving through. They go through the portal. It's literally a portal that takes them into another dimension. And as they're driving through, they see phoenixes flying around. They see, I guess you would call them nine-tailed foxes or karamas. And we end up seeing this little fuzzball species. They're all waving hi to them with their wings. They end up going up to the villagers, and immediately they'll just try to tell them to leave. That they don't care who they are, they don't want their help, they don't even let them explain their story. Until we meet another new character, Yin Nan. Turns out she is actually the sister of their mother. And it's just like, why are you trying to reject them? You know they're part of our village. And we get another explanation dump. She talks about their mother, talks about how they look just like her. And after visiting a shrine for their mother, we get the explanation of their legend. Now, their legend is that their village guards a gateway to it guards a gateway that's sealed behind it is a being that dwells in darkness, I believe they called it. That thousands of years ago, I think they said 4,000 years ago, is how long that village has been there. There was a set of monsters. They basically look like something straight out of an H.P. Lovecraft book. But basically, they were giant. They looked like giant bats with tentacles coming out the bottom half, and their whole thing was they devoured souls. And humanity tried to fight against them. Humanity could not, for whatever, stand up to them. For hundreds of years, they tried to fight these things, and they always lost. It wasn't until their great protector, which was a giant fucking dragon, they had like a whole statue of it, teamed up with the humans, and were able to drive this thing back and steal it away. They found out that this monster behind the gateway has been whispering to their father, pretending to be their mother, because it knows that the 10 rings can open the gate. So they start preparing, because they explained to him that he's coming in 3 days, he's coming with an army, and he said, he's going to burn the village down. And we get to see a nice, cool thing of them, prepping together. Shang-Chi gets this really cool red suit. His sister gets a white one. It turns out that not only did the dragon help them fight, but the dragon gave it scales, and they made weapons and armor out of the scales. The scales are imbued with magic. They're extremely powerful. We see they have bow staffs with dragon scales on both ends, arrows, just all kinds of weapons and armor. Even their clothes have it built into them. It's almost like, it reminded me a lot of Wakanda, how they had vibranium built into their clothes, so it's still fabricy, but has plenty of protection. And then we get to see Ray start training. Katie actually gets grabbed up by a woman who's carrying who gives her a bunch of arrows, and basically they start teaching her how to shoot with a bow. We get a really, really nice scene from his sister, where, again, she used to not train, but Ying Nan comes up to her and gives her a rope spear, which is the first weapon she trained with when she started training. Weight on rope with weight on one end, blade on the other, and explains to him, you're not at your father's compound anymore. You don't have to hide and train in the shadows. We all train together. Men, women, doesn't matter. And we actually get a nice, cool montage of her training with the rope spear, doing some really nastiness with it. I love the choreography for the scene. And then we see Ying Nan, their aunt, kind of doing, some katas and whatnot. And Shang-Chi comes up to her and basically explains, my mother was the only one who was able to beat him. Show me how. So they start fighting. And this was a really, really cool fight scene, because it showed the big difference in their fighting styles. Whereas he is more direct and aggressive, she was, going around his attacks. He's swinging, his stance, he has super tight posture, tight fists, and where she's just kind of moving like water. They stop, and she grabs his hand and opens up his hand, basically trying to show him he needs to relax. And she starts moving his arms and his legs to try and show him part of their fighting style. And they start doing some cool stuff. He starts adapting. He ends up almost beating her. Except now comes the mysticism. Because right after he manages to get the upper hand, she ends up backing up. And she basically does some movements and the wind starts rising up. And it starts wrapping around her. You see the leaves just flying everywhere. He still tries to attack her, and then he just gets blasted away. It was match funny. This is supposed to be her channeling the power of the Great Protector. After the three of them have some dinner, we get another big flashback. Shang-Chi disappears, goes off by himself, and we actually find out what happened to his mother. It shows his mother training with him, teaching their daughter, and some men show up at the compound. I guess these are gangsters, and they explain that her husband tried to destroy their group, and they want vengeance. She's just like, okay, but my kids have nothing to do with this. She sends them off. They allow her to send them off, but they still say, blood has to be paid with blood. So she ends up trying to fight these men by herself. There's about 10 of them. And Shang-Chi's watching it the entire time. Well, then another 20 men show up. And even she she swallows hard, but she still ends up trying to fight. she ends up getting killed by these men. Turns out, the entire time leading up to this point, I thought she died of natural causes. Turns out she was murdered. Their father wasn't in the compound, and when he does show back up, he is distraught that she's obviously dead. It also happens to be that while he had his family, he actually took off his rings. The way he described it is he finally found something that was worth growing old for. But after seeing her dying, he kind of snaps. And he's basically saying, you know, if I never took the rings off, these men would never have tried this. So he goes back into being who he was. And that's when they start Shang-Chi's training. And it turns out that the man that he sent him to kill was the man that killed his mother. They go, while Shang-Chi's still a kid, when he first puts the rings back on, he takes him to go and hunt these men down and kills a bunch of them right in front of Shang-Chi. But then the actual man that led them there wasn't there. So they end up going through Shang-Chi's training, and they finally find the man that kills him. That's when he sends them after him. Turns out Shang-Chi didn't choke on the mission, he actually killed him. But he didn't want to keep being a killer, so he ran away. He ends up explaining this to Katie, who tries to check on her friend. And the whole point of this section, and we end up seeing it from the things, the flashbacks that the mother says, the things that his aunt says, is that yes, he has darkness, but he also has light. Yes, his father is a part of him, but so is his mother. And it's supposed to be the entirety of Shang-Chi accepting who he is. And that's ends up being the big payoff near the end. The next morning, Wenwu shows up with his forces, and we see everybody ready to go, all with weapons. Shang-Chi has a staff, and they just all go nuts. It ends up being like a giant war or mini war. Wenwu's people have like crossbows that shoot like taser like wrappings, and it gets crazy. It turns out that all the weapons and stuff that have the dragon scales on them, they're all magical, and they all give them like special abilities. So Sean ends up fighting against his dad, whereas his sister, now with a rope dagger that actually is made of dragon scales, ends up going just ham on people. She ends up fighting a dude with the sword arm and just beats his ass. And poor Katie's doing her best. At first, they didn't want to let her fight because they said she wasn't ready, because she only learned how to shoot like a day ago. But let's focus on what happened, which was Sean fighting his dad. They're going back and forth. You know, he's obviously got the rings on, but Sean's able to keep up with him, not only because he adopted his mother's fighting style, but because he has the staff. But he starts to lose, and his dad is just like, you know, you're afraid of me, you've always been afraid, you watched your mother die, you did nothing about it. And this triggers something in Shane, and he ends up getting the upper hand. But he's still trying to talk to his father. He's like, you know, you trained your son to be a killer, this is what you wanted. But as he's about to win, Wenwu hears the voice of his wife again from the gate, and you see the gateway in the distance. So he freezes and freaks out. Shang-Chi tries to stop him. He ends up getting blasted with the rings and gets shot into the middle of the lake, and the lake just closes in on him and he starts to sink. Wenwu uses the rings, which is cool because he can actually like push himself off the ground, sends himself flying, ends up at the gateway. And he still hears his wife's voice, and he starts trying to hit the gate. He starts trying to destroy the gate with the rings. It was cool because at first he's like hitting it, but then he actually like wraps the rings, all 10 of them, around one arm and just starts hitting it. And as he's hitting the gateway, you could see the gateway is actually made of dragon scale. But the scales start to open up a little bit, and these monsters start to leak through. The monsters come in, they fly toward the village, and Shang-Chi's aunt is just like, we need to stop, we need to work together, because these monsters are coming. And we actually see the monster attack one of the soldiers, suck its soul out, and take the soul back to the gateway. And they explain that they're taking souls to the gateway to try and strengthen the actual monster that can break through the gate. These are just basically babies. And at first the soldiers are like, we don't need your help, we can handle this. and they try to attack these monsters, but their weapons do literally nothing. The monsters, like, they're other dimensional monsters, so their bodies like contort and reform around it. So you guys remember the sword guy? He gets attacked by one of these things. He tries to fight it off with his sword, and his attacks are just going right through it. It's actually his, Shang-Chi's sister that actually saves him, and because of that, the soldiers, the warriors from the village, they decide to work together. So we get a scene of them all loading up with weapons, all getting ready to fight these monsters, and Katie, who they kept out of the fight up till now, gets her bow and arrow, and her, the one who was teaching her how to shoot, it just like, don't die. So they're all lined up on the shore, and Wenwu was still punching at the barrier, and these things are just coming out. There's like 50 of them, and they let off a bunch of arrows, kill off a few of them, and it just becomes even more chaos. Katie and ends up asking Xialing if she knew where Shang-Chi was, and she's like, I thought you knew. And we actually see that he is underwater, and he is completely unconscious. But while he's unconscious, he is sinking lower and lower, and he's dreaming about his mother. And we hear her giving her speech, talking about, you know, she's a part of him, everything that she believes, everything that she is, the light. And as he's, you know, basically accepting who he is, we actually see the water kind of absorb into him, and he manages to come to. And as the water's wrapping around him, out comes a dragon. The Great Protector actually comes face to face with him, and basically it saves him, because it comes shooting out of the water with him riding its back, and just starts tearing these little monsters to pieces. As it's flying around killing all these things, his sister is just basically, you gotta go stop Dad. So he goes over, and he gets ready to fight his dad one more time. And this is where shit gets even more crazy, because they start fighting, except Shang-Chi's like on another level now. He's actually able to keep up with his dad. They're going back and forth, hand to hand. At one point, his dad hits him with the rings, except he blocks the rings, and then the rings change color. They go from their usual blue, and they start glowing orange. And at first, he just like stops and is like, what's going on? But then he remembers some movements that his mother taught him. And as he does them, the rings kind of follow the path of his hands, and he realizes that now he has control of those 5 rings. So now he has 5 rings, his dad has 5 rings. So they go back to fighting, except now he's using the rings along with his mother's martial arts. And it was actually pretty dope. There's actually one scene where they like lock the rings together and they're like struggling, and they're going back and forth. There's this really, really cool scene that I love, where he like makes a platform off the ring. He like steps off the rings and comes down with a kick on his dad, and his dad blocks with the rings while he's kicking the rings down, and they like explode. We cut back over to the dragon fighting all the little monsters, with the villagers fighting, the soldiers fighting, and the monsters start attacking the dragon's eye. Xialing takes her rope spear and starts cutting and saves the dragon, and she ends up riding the dragon, fighting in the air with this thing while the dragon's flying around. It was fucking cool. This is the point where the CGI was just really, really good. But back to Shang-Chi and his fight with his dad. They're going back and forth again, and his dad starts getting the upper hand, and he ends up doing an attack with the other 5 rings all at once, basically blasting Shang-Chi to the ground, because he ends up in the air. But he hits the ground now, no rings. He's back to being a normal dude. And when the smoke clears, Shang-Chi has control of all 10 rings. And you just see him put his hands together, and he starts, like, energy starts forming in the rings, and he starts, like, condensing the rings. And it looks like he's about to finish his dad when he just throws the rings to the ground, because he doesn't want to be a killer anymore. And his dad's just like, I need to get through the gate. I need to save your mother. And he's just like, I wish that were true, but your family needs you right now. You gotta stop. And right when he's about to finally have his change of heart, the big monster in the darkness breaks through, shatters the gateway, comes out. This thing is massive, massive. And first thing it does is it flies up, uses its tentacles to grab up Shang-Chi's dad and sucks the soul out of him. Shang-Chi's dad tries to grab the rings back and tries to fight this thing off, but he can't move as it drains his soul, and he gives the rings to Shang-Chi. And once Shang-Chi has the rings, this monster flies off after eating his dad's soul, goes to attack the villagers. Dragon swings by. Shang-Chi uses the rings to shoot himself off, ends up on the dragon with his sister. And this is again CGI going crazy, because they're basically trying to fight this monster while on the back of this dragon. The dragon's starts flying around the monster and starts kind of bending the water, trying to attack the monster with the water, pull it under the water, and it's working. It's like he's like trapped in a whirlpool. But then the little monsters take all the souls that they've grabbed, and they just start feeding into the big monster until it starts to glow purple, and it breaks out of the dragon's fucking grab, and it starts grabbing at the dragon, starts fighting back. Eventually, it grabs the dragon and starts trying to drain the dragon's soul, and we go back to Katie and her master in the cage. Like, if he drains the dragon's soul, that thing's gonna be unstoppable. So they end up trying to shoot it, and they try going for its neck, and her master gets taken out, gets his soul drained out. So it's up to her by herself, and she's freaking the hell out. So she ends up aiming for the dragon. We go back over to Shang-Chi and his sister, and they're trying to attack this thing, and while getting attacked by all the little ones, and they're trying to save the dragon. And as the dragon's about to get killed, Katie manages to hit the big monster in the throat, tears a hole out the side, and the dragon gets free. The dragon's pissed. Its eyes start glowing orange. Starts attacking with the water. Shang-Chi starts attacking it with the rings. Even his sister grabs it in the mouth with the rope spear. It was dope. But what really got me was what Shang-Chi did to it, because he gets above it and shoots the rings down at it. And as the rings are hitting it, they're not coming back to him. They're stuck there. And he starts spinning it, and he spins the rings, and the rings kind of like drill into it. And once they're inside of it, he rips the rings out, tearing the thing to pieces. And once that thing dies, all the other little ones die. And it was mad cool. But then he gets the rings back, lands, he's all safe. They make it back to the village. They realize not only they did win, but they lost so many lives. They get back, and everybody, they just see all the dead soldiers and dead warriors, and it was very bittersweet. But they have a little memorial service for the people they lost. They light lanterns, put them over the water for their dad, their mom, everybody, and then the dragon kind of wraps the water around all the lanterns, basically to show that even though they're gone, there's still one people. And it was a really, really sweet ending. But the last thing we see is Katie and Sean back at the bar with their with their friends, the ones they were with at the beginning of the movie, basically telling them what they did, the whole story. And the one who got on their case about not doing enough with their life, she doesn't believe them. She thinks, it's all bullshit. You expect me to believe that you went from doing nothing to saving the world? And she's just going off on them, and all of a sudden we see in the back, we see a portal open, and everybody in the background's like, and then Wong comes through, and she ends up turning around, and they're like, and he's like, Shang-Chi. He's like, present. He's like, do you have the rings? He's like, yeah. He's like, we got a lot to talk about. Come on, you two. And he tells Katie to come too. And the movie ends with the two of them going off with Wong through a portal. And it was a funny ending, and you know what? It landed perfectly. Now, we've got 2 after credit scenes, and the first one surprised the shit out of me. So the first one, they're at Carmitage. So the first one, they're at what looked like the Sanctum or Carmitage, and Juan is examining the ring, and he's like, "This material is not made out of, not like anything in any of our archives. I've never seen it before." And then we see holograms of Bruce Banner, and he's just like, "Is it that it's not made of vibranium? Maybe some alien tech?" And we see Captain Marvel. The reason this surprised me is because it's Bruce Banner, and this is after Endgame, because he's got his arm in a sling because his arm's still fucked up from what happened in Endgame, but he's not Professor Hulk anymore. He's Bruce Banner. So this was very, very weird to me. But Captain Marvel's there too. Her hair has grown back out, and even she says, you know, whatever these rings are made of, they're not any kind of alien tech she's ever seen. But she ends up leaving, and they kind of like superimpose the rings through like a magical hologram type thing that Juan does. And he shows that the first time he used the rings, they could feel it all the way in Carmitage. And whatever the rings are made of, whatever they're doing, they're sending out a beacon to something. They just don't know what. But he basically explains to them after Banner leaves that their lives are going to change and that they need to get ready for whatever is going to happen next. And that's where that scene ends. The second after credit scene is literally at the end of the credits, and it shows his sister taking her posters off the wall of her room inside her father's compound. And old Razor Arm shows up, and he's just like, you know, they're ready. She comes out, and she sits in her father's throne, well, kind of throne, you know, with the 10 ring symbol behind her. And she's like, we've got a lot to do. And as it zooms out, it shows all the leaders, you know, trading information, trading pictures. And it zooms out even more, and it shows a bunch of women training on the compound with new kinds of weapons. And then it comes out even more. We see men training, and they're all training together. And it zooms out over the compound, it shows them rebuilding the compound. And basically, she took over the 10 rings for her father instead of Shang-Chi. And then it says, you know, the 10 rings will return. So, all in all, great movie from start to finish. Great story. The characters really, really carried the movie. And I really, really enjoyed the storyline, and I liked the way it ended. Shang-Chi becoming the hero that he's supposed to be. His sister, you know, getting the respect she deserved, because she basically was in the shadows the entire time. And Katie, like I said, she was the heart and soul of the movie. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoy this review. If you haven't seen this movie and you watch this, first off, you're crazy. Sorry for all the spoilers. But go check out this movie out. It really deserves our support. If you have seen the movie, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. And I hope I didn't miss anything. If you guys want to check me out on social media, those links will be down below. That's it for me. I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video. Later.
I have a dream, that's all I need. I'll make it happen with some work and belief. Know what I want, so I'll take it on. I'll make mistakes, but mistakes make you strong. Let's break it down for a minute. I want the crown, I'm gon' get it. You hear me loud, man, I'm winning. Yeah, Charlie Sheen will be grinning.